Today I'd like to introduce you to one of my favorite people, Susan Lux.
Cool.
Susan worked for me long ago and far away in Hollywood, California at a company called Omnibus Computer Graphics on the lot at Paramount Studios. She's had a fascinating career. She's retired now and spends her time making colorful creations women love to wear. But she's had an interesting career as a programmer, working at Disney on rides and various other projects, and then programming assembly language video games. She wrote the VIC-20 version of Ms. PacMan and several other video games. And then she worked for me developing 3D graphics software for the motion picture industry. So I thought it would be interesting, Susan, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of your story, starting with being told that women couldn't be computer scientists.
I I always liked math. I liked puzzles. I liked pattern matching, problem solving, and I wasn't very good at computer programming when I was in high school, but I took this class and suddenly it all kind of clicked as a thing, and I took more programming classes and didn't realize I was going to be a computer science major until I transferred to the University of Central Florida as a junior. And when I had to declare a major, I thought, I guess I'm a computer science major. I have all these programming classes and math classes behind me, and the department chair called me in to say I didn't need to pursue my degree. I wouldn't make it through his program, and I asked him why not, because I thought it was pretty smart and I had a really good grade point, and he said women don't.
Do you think he was trying to motivate you?
No, they don't. I think he was trying to actively discourage me. There were only a handful of women students in his department, but I got a lot of encouragement from a particular professor who, she was a grad student at that time, but she was my advisor, and Kate would tell me, just keep on going. She's like, you look them in the eye and you deserve to be here. And she would say things like, for God's sake, you 4-pointed four semesters of calculus. You can do this. I'd be like, okay. I think it was very hard for women to be computer science students. And I know it was really hard for me, but I really liked it. I really liked
What was the hardest part about it?
the active discouragement, not the work, but the standing there, always trying to convince somebody that I was allowed to be there.
Yeah.
But
So that was back in the days of punch cards?
back in the days of punch cards, yep. And so I didn't see a computer until later in my life. So the way I saw my first computer was I was walking through Disney World with a friend of mine one day, and a man in a suit came walking towards us. His name was Luke Compare, my friend told me, and he's like, do you want to meet him? He's head of scientific systems, which is the big geek group at Disney. At that time, it was the group that did all of the interesting work from my perspective. And they did programming for rides, they did programming for special projects. And so my friend introduced me, and Lou said, he told Lou that I was just finishing my computer science degree, and Lou asked me if I'd like a tour of his department. And I was like, heck yeah. So he gave me a tour of Scientific Systems, which is down in the tunnels below Disney World. And it was a room filled, well, it was two rooms. The first room was filled with all the machines that ran the audio animatronics in the park. So it was just, it kind of looked like your studio there, Dave. I mean, it was rows and rows of machines that did things. And the second room was computer center, and it was a raised floor, super cold room. And it was so exciting to me. Because I didn't have any concept of what a computer looked like. It wasn't like now, where you just go out and Google everything and everything's knowable. Not until I saw something could I know it. And so Lou said to me after the tour, he's like, I've never seen anybody so excited about seeing a computer. Do you want to work for me? And I thought, yeah, I would. And I did a lot of jobs to get through school, like cleaning apartments and waitressing and grading papers and any job anybody offered me. So this was actually a really good thing. He offered me an internship, and so I could quit all of those other jobs. And so I worked for him as an intern, and then when I graduated, he offered me a real job.
So what kinds of projects did you work on there?
First I did small things. I made a people counter that counted people coming into the park. I made pinball games in the Main Street arcade, making little guys run around the bases for, big league baseball. And they were all things that were microprocessor based. They were assembly language. I really loved that level of programming. I think I never really left the idea that I was an assembly language programmer, even though that's not a thing anymore. And and then when Disney started creating Epcot, I got to program the Imagination Pavilion ride and work on that, which was super great.
What an amazing time to be there.
It was an amazing time. I mean, we worked like demons. We worked so many hours a week. It's sort of amazing now. We were so young. I always think, why would anybody hire such young people who, objectively...
Because they'll work 80 hours a week.
I guess. I don't know, I wasn't that young. Well, I was still young when I worked for you, Dave, and we worked some pretty extreme hours until the company edicted shifts for everyone. One of the stupidest things on earth. But yeah, I guess it was very it was a very different time. I don't know if those kinds of jobs exist anymore. Maybe I'm just out of touch with them. But there was so much to learn. All the people at Disney were... I think that they recognized that people needed to learn. And Lou, my boss, was a guy who always recognized me as somebody who needed... I needed to learn as a motivator to do a job. And he would always say to me, what do you want to learn next? And I would tell him, and he'd say, I have the perfect job for you. And so he could see that was a motivator for me. He was a great boss. like all my bosses were great bosses in that way. I think you knew that I needed a job that I could learn at. And I think a really good boss like you or Lou could say, this is a person who's motivated by whatever. I think other people were motivated by other things.
Why would you leave a job like that? Where did you go from Disney?
I left out of idealism after after Epcot opened, and Tokyo Disneyland was opening at the same time. So Disney had hired gobs of programmers and engineers to make these parks. And as we were working those 80 hours a week, they would say things like, you take care of us and then we'll take care of you. And at the end of all of that, they started laying off programmers and engineers like crazy. And my idealistic self said, that's not fair. Though they didn't lay me off, I thought, I gotta leave because this just isn't fair. And there were a lot of people from Disney. It was the wild west of the 80s, right? So a lot of people from Disney splintering off to start their own companies because we all knew so much after all those experiences. And two guys in LA that I worked with at Disney, at Epcot, they offered me a job programming video games in Los Angeles. So I moved to LA. This just seemed like a solid life plan at that point. So there.
Must have been quite a change.
Well, my 62-year-old self says, what now? You're going to do what? But my 20-something-year-old self said, what a good idea. I'm going to LA to program video games. And so their company was called Rich and Rich Synergistic Enterprises Limited. And these two guys, Rich Ward and Rich Sidley, they had a bunch of contracts to produce arcade games for home machines. So we were programming for the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64 and the Atari 800, all those really fine machines. The Apple II, and God, there were so many machines at that point. There were so my specialty was the VIC-20, and I programmed Ms. PacMan and Dig Dug and Threshold, kind of shoot 'em up game, and we'd go to like Atari, and some kid would play the video game for us all afternoon, and we'd watch him, and he'd narrate like, "Oh, this is really important. Ms. PacMan's sitting here, and it's the safe spot, and that's important. You need this in the game." And so we'd get all the rules by watching somebody play, and we'd go back and program them for these other machines. That was it was as a programming task. Oh my gosh, it was accomplishable. It was, you had control of the whole machine. You were, writing into screen memory and making things do things that they, were never intended to do. And then the whole bottom fell out of the micro market, the home machine market, when eventually after not very long, really, all those home game machines just went away for the most part, and Apple and IBM became the two machines that people bought, and all those contracts evaporated overnight, and the company went bust. It went bust spectacularly, as a lot of companies did in the 80s. So sadly, that was the end of that job. So then I needed a new job, right? suddenly I needed a new job. I was swayed by money. I took a job programming it was a big company called Systems Development Corporation, and they just offered me what I thought was a gob of money, and I took their job and thought, like day one, this is not for me, because it was I wasn't making anything.
That sounds like military or aerospace.
It was, and it was like we were making a layered X.25 interface, and I had one level of this programming task on a team of people who, objectively, I just looked at them and thought, this is never going to happen, and this can't be accomplished.
Was it that it couldn't be accomplished, or this is just not the way to accomplish it?
Well, there was part of me that thought, somebody has surely already written this interface, right? Like, this has to exist in the world. And this company was a subsidiary of Burroughs, and I thought, Burroughs has written this because it was an interface that had to exist. Anyway, they would say to me, no, it's fine. This is a time and materials contract. It doesn't matter if... And I was like, okay, but it matters to me. And,
the more time you waste, the more money we make.
Pretty much that. Much that. I mean, the thing that I learned at that company was, A, never take a job for money, just because of the money, and B, I really need to not just learn something, but I need to be making something. I need.
Yeah, you have to be able to get behind it.
Yeah, well, that's it. I need to care about it, at some level, whether it's, caring about it for the making's sake, or, you get to the end and you've created something, or whether this is just really a worthwhile thing to produce on Earth and a worthwhile thing to contribute to. I frankly don't know what we were making over there at SDC, but whatever it was never going to happen. And so I went, this is actually where you come in, Dave. I went to Europe with a friend for a month, 3 weeks. I thought, they're giving me 3 weeks of vacation time at this crazy job. I'm going to take it now. And so I was in Paris, and my friend's uncle was head of French Seagraph, and Bernie had organized a exhibit in the American Embassy of computer graphics. And he had this guy from Ohio State named Tom Linehan who had arranged this whole thing. And so we went to this exhibit, and I talked to this man from Ohio State and said, I'd really like to work in this industry. And he said, well, you're in LA, and I have an old student named Rick Balabuck, and he's out there. You should just give him a call and tell him, that you talked to me, and that'll be your introduction. And so I went back to LA, and I thought, no way in hell can I call out of the blue somebody I don't know, and But as it turned out, my neighbor was she was the secretary for the president of Paramount, and she took me to this casino night party, and Omnibus was on the Paramount lot, and a young woman was flirting with my boyfriend, and I thought, I need to get into this conversation. And so I started talking with her, and she said, yeah, I work for Omnibus. And I'm like, wait, now what? And so I said, do you know Rick Balabuck? And she said, yeah, he's right over there. So I went to talk to Rick Balabach.
I never heard this story. Who was the young woman?
Georgia Sprague.
That was Georgia.
Georgia, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. The world is very round. The world is very round. All you need to do if you're dissatisfied and you want to change careers is go to Paris. That's my takeaway here. Yep.
Wow.
So Rick said, yeah, we're looking for programmers. Come on in for an interview. I was like, okay.
Wow. Well, let me interrupt just a second and give you a little bit of background about what led up to all that. I had been at Image West, and Image West was owned by a company called Omnibus, which was a partnership between Cliff Brown and John Penny. And at some point, John read all this stuff about what was going on at NYIT and in the world of digital computer animation, and he wanted to move in that direction, but Image West had always used analog computers and been able to work in real time. And so the two of them ended up splitting apart, and John went on to do what he did with Omnibus, and Image West stayed in the analog world. At any rate, several years later, I got a phone call from John Penny. I had met him at SIGGRAPH a few years earlier, and I was ready to move on from Image West. They wanted to build another analog computer, and I could see that that was not the direction the industry was moving in. And he told me he had raised $13 million in the stock exchange and was building a facility in New York. They were renovating a soundstage at Paramount Studios. He had bought the III computer that did Tron. He had all kinds of stuff going on, and he wanted me to be the vice president of research and development. So it was kind of a dream job, and I agreed to it. And then I was in charge of getting all the stuff at Information International figured out, ready to move, renovating the soundstage at Paramount, which was a major reconstruction job, computer floors, air conditioning, and all that. And then we had some people starting to do software development that came down from Canada, Doug McMillan and Rick Balabach. And we made a deal with Caltech to have our VAX 780 delivered to their computer room. So Doug and Rick were in a little room in the basement of the computer center working on that. And we finally got all that renovation at Studio G finished. I'll find some pictures of that somewhere. And that's about the time that you ran into Rick and we hired you as a programmer. So that's a little bit of the background of that part of the story, and I'll turn it back over to you.
It's really funny. I mean, I think back and I think, I don't know why anybody would hire me to do these jobs.
Well, I mean, think about it. Disney, and you'd written video games.
I did understand 2D graphics pretty well. but I have to tell you another funny story about when you hired me.
Okay.
When I got my first paycheck, it was more money than we had agreed on. And it was less money than I had made at my previous horrible job. And I had this real moral quandary of what to do now. And finally I decided, nope, it's not ethical to not say. So I came to your office and I said to you, you've paid me too much. we agreed on this, and you looked at me like I had three heads and said, nobody has ever said this to me before. and then you said, frankly, we couldn't remember what we offered you, so we paid you what your last salary was. And I was like, oh, okay. And you said, it would be a lot more work for us to change this than for you to just go away.
That sounds like me.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Just wanted to say.
That's funny. I'd forgotten about that.
Sure, it probably wasn't that meaningful or that stress invoking in your life, but it was in mine. It was that, no, I think I need to say. So.
Well, I guess at that point we'd moved into Studio G at Paramount, right?
Yeah. And I loved working at that job, Dave, because it was all about making something. It was all about making things that made things work. And the great irony of my life now is when I worked at Omnibus, I never saw myself as creative. I never saw myself as artistic. And, it was not a predictor of the path that I was going to choose later in my life. But
well, now you told me a story once about how I pressed you into service doing an animation job.
Yes, you said that all programmers had to do at least one animation to understand what it was to use the tools. And it's funny, I don't remember doing the job as much as I remember the terror of having to do the job, because it required this kind of artistic creativity that I did not feel I possessed. And I was not, I wasn't the artistic child, I was the smart child. And so, and I don't remember even how it got produced. Obviously, I wasn't the one who was doing it. I was probably just facilitating somebody who actually knew how to do it. And so I think that was the hardest thing I ever did at Omnibus, though. and I probably did learn the magnitude of how much work it was to use these tools that we were writing. And I was always keenly aware that that a tool didn't have to make sense to me necessarily, but it had to make sense to the animators who were using them. So things like 3D editors, when we wrote, here's the XY plane and here's the YZ plane or whatever, and people could put those things together in their minds. I couldn't put them together, but I could write the software. And as long as somebody could describe to me the thing that they were aiming for that would be useful, just like I couldn't play video games when I programmed them, but I could program well enough that I could slow it down to quarter speed so I could actually play it, make Ms PacMan eat dots. And, as long as I could think of a way to test it, it didn't have to be something I could use. And I knew I would never be an animator because I couldn't use the tools effectively. I didn't see space in the way that animators see space. And I didn't see, I didn't see the technical parts, the technical artistic parts of it. I could see the technical pieces of it. Like, to me, code has a shape, and it has a visual aspect that it's right. So as an artist now, at this point in my life, I know when something works. I know it. My eye knows it. Just like I knew with code. I could see the shape of code. I could see the problem is here. When I looked at a block of code, I could see this isn't right. This doesn't belong here. And so at that point in my life, I think the artistic part of me was really the artistry of what code looks like, not what an animation looks like. And it's good that there are all kinds of people in this world who know how to do all those different things. You know, we need animators and artists and people who can see all the mathematics and people who can see code, and people like me I was a maker and a finisher. You know, I could make something end to end, and I wanted to make things end to end, but in collaboration for a purpose for somebody else to use. And I loved that part of what I did at Omnibus.
Well, I'll tell you, I've had a lot of people work for me in different capacities, and you always had the ability. I mean, I could tell you, Susan, this is what we need done, and this is how it needs to work, and these are the things you're going to need. So go do it, and if you have problems, come to me, and we'll solve them and move forward. And with the minimum of drama and stress, you just always came back, and here it is, and it works, and it's exactly what we needed. And do you know how rare that is?
Nope.
Fun times. Well, do you have any other stories you want to share with us about code, about working in Hollywood, about the sorry state of things today?
I think I didn't come to appreciate how creative code is until later in my life. Like, I didn't see it as an art form. I do now. Now I think, now I know that some of the most creative people I know are programmers. They just see the world in a different way. I mean, programmers that I worked with, especially in LA in the 80s in Toronto, and they're musicians and writers and artists, and they really, I mean, I don't think I gave myself quite enough credit, because I thought art was, you know, making something that hangs on the wall, not art as creating something that didn't exist before. And I didn't give myself enough credit as a writer, as a flailing cellist, as a cook, as a, you know, as anything that is about creating and creating, exactly making something from a handful of things that were not that before you created the end product, you know. And code is just, especially when you're making something that's really accomplishable, it's like magic, right? You're conjuring, you have a handful of instructions to use to make a machine dance. And I loved it when programming was that. And I loved being able to do that in the computer graphics realm, especially because somebody took what I made and made something that was even better, right? It's just, it's not the end product, it's the middle product. And there will be no accolades for that, except it's its own reward. It's really its own reward to make a piece of code that works. I was saddened by the demise of all that all that was with Omnibus, right? So when I think about that, my story, which is just my story, is that Omnibus bought the entire computer graphics industry and then went bust. That they bought all the assets that were meaningful and existed, and then tried to make things that were very unlike play nice together. And that was never going to happen.
I've always felt it was more the people than the machines. I mean, there were 3 separate companies. They had their own programmers, sales staff, creative staff, hardware, and they were all different, and they were used to working in their own way, competing with each other. And gosh, I mean, uppercase Fortran versus C and Unix versus Cray assembly language.
Oh my gosh, that was the greatest thing ever. Cray assembly language. My bliss.
I'm afraid you didn't get to do much of that.
Nope, but I got to do enough of it to make me think this is where it's really at.
Well, you're in the club now. But to be fair, the 3 companies were not well managed. I mean, it's almost impossible to make money in that business anyway. You have huge capital expenditures and huge staffs of people to handle the machines, the code, the client, and then at the end of the day, you haven't been able to charge enough to pay for all of that. Digital was essentially already bankrupt. Able was on its last legs. Omnibus was the upstart and had raised all this money, but had spent through it. So, I mean, the whole thing just collapsed. It was really sad.
I think one of the biggest mistakes of thinking about code and programming and programmers is that once something is made, it is a thing on its own, which is rarely true. I mean, so much code is attached to the person who made it or the people who made it. And you need those people in order to maintain it and to make it do the next thing. And it isn't something that you can just slide across to somebody else and say, do this next thing with this, because the temptation of most programmers is, first I'm going to rewrite that fucker, and then I'm going to go on from there, right? Like, not invented here. I have a better way of doing it. I was never a I'll rewrite this thing kind of person, but I was a person like, you really have to make me care about this piece of code before I can go on and change it up. So I think, like, all programmers are still human beings, and code attached to the programmers. It would be very hard to say, you have a way of doing this on your particular platform. Now I want you to move over here and play nice with this other group. And over and over in my career, I've had projects where people wanted to bring 2 unlike things together, but it wasn't just the object of code. It was those 2 unlike pieces of code along with the team that created them, and that was never going to happen because it wasn't invented here, because I have a better way. I already know how to do this. Or I think often companies think about code as its own thing when it's not. It's its own thing attached to a lot of people, and it depends on those people in order to make it do the next thing.
One of the things that used to drive me crazy, you were talking about people wanting to change it to make it theirs. The level we were at, we were just trying to make something work.
Right.
But now you've gotten far enough along in the evolution of some of these tools that it becomes possible to do the coding and expect people to do their jobs with it. I know for a while my company ZFX was producing CGI, and we licensed software from Houdini, which originated sort of at the code we developed at Omnibus. And it used to drive me nuts because we'd get somebody trained in a particular piece of code, how to use it, how the GUI worked. And then a new version would come along and everything would be different. It's like, this used to be right here. What happened to it? Well, we changed it. The programmer didn't like it. Well, what didn't they like about it? Well, I wouldn't have done it that way. So it's kind of like a cat in a new environment has to go and piss in all the corners to prove that it owns the place.
I have to say I was never that programmer, but I think that's actually rare. I think almost every programmer I know who's a producing programmer, not the slowing down programmer, or but the ones who are real producers and kind of the alpha dogs of the group, they always need to change things in order to make it their own. Me, I'm just like intrigued by the way it works. When the web world came in, and I'd gone back to school to become an English teacher, God damn it, and I got that degree and a master's in English and education, and I went out to be an English teacher, and I took a job as a programming language instructor at a college instead of becoming that English teacher, because it turned out the only thing I had to say about English was I like to read and write, and you should too. And that didn't feel like a curriculum, but I had so much to say about programming languages. And when I was offered a job as a programming language instructor, I was like, oh yes, I'd like that. And it was at a college that had mostly students who were returning women, African American women mostly. And I thought, here's a place I can contribute, and I have something to say. And so I did that for 6 years. But when the web world came in, I was offered a job creating a program for the state of Michigan to make a talent bank. So people would enter their resumes and employers would enter jobs, and then I did job matching. And I thought, I didn't even know what the web was at that point. So it was really new. And again, it was making something that didn't exist before, but also making something that seemed really worthwhile to me. And the politics of the university was more than I could bear.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you and reliving some of those times. It's been, 40 years?
Almost, Dave.
Almost.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, I think in all of this career that I've had in programming, I always started over at the beginning of something. So, when things didn't exist in computer graphics, when the web just started, when people programmed at the machine level, and that's where my heart is in creating from the beginning. And I don't belong there anymore. I really don't belong there anymore.
No, I don't either. I was just talking yesterday to a guy that used to work for me at a later time in history, and he was saying, he got into this, and he got into the web, and he got into all these new things that came along, but it all just became boring. And now he's gotten into the blockchain, and he's excited again because it's The new frontier.
I tell my kids that I they kind of ask me what I fear about aging. And what I fear most is that technology will pass me by. Like my mother, who was never in the tech world and knows very little about it, is expected to do so many things on a computer now just to find out results of tests or make appointments or so many things. And it is so hard for her. And it's not hard for me to do those things. But I worked in the tech industry for 40 years and used those tools, right? But there will be a moment that technology passes me by. And I will be sitting where my mom is sitting, and I will not be doing that gracefully or graciously. It'll really just, it galls me to think. But inevitably, I'm not keeping up. Inevitably, that moment will happen, right? And I'm not going to like that. I'm not going to like that at all.
Well, you don't have to let it completely overtake you.
No, but you know, what's clear to me is that technology will march on, and you know, things will be invented, and stuff that just seems incomprehensible to me, like blockchain and NFTs. Oh my gosh. the like creating air. I can't even wrap my head around those things. And more to the point, I don't want to, right?
Well, that's the bigger problem.
It's very nice to talk to you, Dave, and it's really, it's always fun for me to look back and think what I made in this world. I don't know that all of it was something to be excited about, or sometimes I think about where the tech world has brought us, and I wonder if it was a good thing to contribute to or not. All in all, I think it's quite fascinating to have been part of so many different things that were really new. And I'm glad that department head was wrong. I really feel like in the end I did belong there, and that I did contribute to the computing world.
Well, it's really nice to talk to you.
Thanks a lot. I like that you filled in some of the blanks of over the conversations that we've had of what happened in the, you know, like, here's your flawed understanding, Susan, but here's what really happened behind the scenes.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. I'll catch up with you soon.